Let's talk about your shoulder. Ever been told you have a tear in it? That word, it just sounds scary, doesn't it? Like something's broken and needs to be fixed. But what if I told you that for many of us, that so-called tear might be totally normal? Like as normal as getting gray hair.
All right, let's get right into it. You know that nagging pain in your shoulder? That little twinge you feel when you reach up for something on a shelf? Yeah, that. It's one of the most common complaints out there, and it sends millions of us to the doctor convinced something is seriously wrong in there.
And the story is almost always the same, right? Step 1, you feel the pain. Step 2, you go see a doctor. Step 3, they send you for an MRI. And then step 4, the results come back and boom, there's a problem. A tear, some kind of tendon thing, they always find something. And we think, okay, great, case closed. We found the bad guy.
You know, we put so much trust in those MRI images. We see that picture, we read the report, and we immediately think, aha, that's why I'm in pain. But what if that's not the whole story? What if that picture isn't telling us what we think it is? Well, a really fascinating new study is about to challenge everything we thought we knew.
And that brings us to the heart of what we're talking about today. See, some researchers over in Finland decided to take a much closer look at this with a huge study called the FIMAGE study. And they were asking a really simple but honestly a pretty profound question.
So their big question was this: is there a real connection between all those abnormalities we see on a rotator cuff MRI and the actual pain someone feels? They wanted to know if the picture really matched the person's experience. And to figure this out, they did something kind of radical. They took hundreds of regular folks and scanned their shoulders. It didn't matter if they had pain or not.
Okay, so what they did was take a big group of adults over 40, a really good cross-section of the population, and they ran high-res MRIs on both of their shoulders. And what they found? Well, it pretty much turns our whole idea of a normal shoulder completely upside down.
So I want you to just look at this number for a second. 99%. Just let that sink in. What in the world could that be referring to?
That 99%? That's the percentage of people in the study, over 600 adults, mind you, who had at least one rotator cuff abnormality pop up on their MRI. I'm not kidding. Out of the whole group, only 7 people had what you'd call a completely clean, normal MRI on both shoulders. Just 7.
And if we break that down, it gets even crazier. Look at this. 62% had a partial thickness tear. That's where the tendon's a little frayed. 25% had tendinopathy, which is basically just some irritation. And get this, 11% had a full thickness tear. The tendon was torn all the way through. The main takeaway here is, this stuff isn't weird or unusual, it's just what a middle-aged shoulder looks like.
And here's where it gets really interesting. A super clear pattern started to show up in the data. The older you get, the more likely you are to have these abnormalities. It's a straight line up. For instance, nobody under 45 had a full thickness tear. But by the time you hit 70, almost a third of people did. It really starts to look like this is just a normal part of aging, kind of like getting wrinkles.
Which, of course, leads us to the big obvious question. If basically everyone has this stuff on their MRI, how can we be so sure it's what's causing the pain? So that's exactly what the researchers did next. They compared the MRIs from shoulders that hurt to the MRIs from shoulders that felt perfectly fine.
This is it. This is the million-dollar question, right? And the answer they found is what makes this study such a game changer. Seriously, get ready for this because it's pretty wild. Okay, check this out. In the shoulders that actually hurt, 98% of them had an abnormality on the MRI. Okay, makes sense. But in the shoulders with zero pain, 96% also had an abnormality. Let that sink in. The difference is tiny, basically nothing. The MRIs from the people in pain and the people with no pain looked almost identical.
Now, you're probably thinking, okay, but what about the really bad ones, like the full thickness tears? Good question, so let's look at just those. Sure, they were a bit more common in people with pain, about 15%, but look at this. Almost 7% of shoulders with absolutely no pain whatsoever also had a full thickness tear. In fact, when you look at all the full thickness tears they found in the entire study, a crazy 78% of them were in people who felt totally fine.
So what's the bottom line? The researchers summed it up perfectly. They said there was poor concordance. That's just a fancy scientific way of saying that what they saw on the MRI and what the person was actually feeling, well, they just didn't line up. The picture wasn't telling the whole story. Not even close.
So this forces us to completely rethink what we're actually looking at on an MRI. We need a new way to talk about it, A new metaphor that doesn't immediately make us panic and think we need to rush into surgery to fix something. And the people who did the study, they suggest we should stop calling these things a disease or a pathology. Instead, maybe we should just see them for what they probably are. Totally normal, predictable changes that happen to our bodies as we get older.
I love this analogy. They suggest thinking of them as wrinkles on the inside. Think about it. Nobody gets a picture of their face, sees a wrinkle, and freaks out demanding surgery to fix a skin tear. We just accept it's a normal part of life. Well, maybe these changes in our rotator cuff are the exact same thing. They're just the internal signs that we've lived a little.
And this is so important. The researchers point out that the words we use really matter. When you hear tear or degeneration, it just sounds terrifying, right? It makes you think something is broken. But if we started using more neutral language, it could seriously reduce a patient's anxiety and maybe stop us from jumping to the conclusion that every little thing on a scan needs to be fixed with some big intervention.
So, what's the big takeaway for you? It's this. An MRI is just one piece of the puzzle. It is not the final answer. It's just a bit of information that has to be considered along with everything else. Your story, what a doctor finds in a physical exam, what your goals are. Look, your pain is absolutely real, but the cause might be a lot more complicated than just one little spot on an image.
And that leaves us with one last really important thought. This study isn't saying that a rotator cuff tear can never cause pain. Of course it can. What it is saying is that a lot of the time it doesn't. And that forces us to think bigger, to think about what else could be causing pain, and more importantly, what we should actually do about it. It really shifts the whole goal, from fixing a picture to helping a person feel and move better. So I'll just leave you with this question. What really matters more? A perfect-looking MRI or a shoulder that actually feels good and lets you live your life?